Okay, so I wanted to see if I can't follow this out a little bit. Now, this was partly motivated from looking at some comments, watching some videos. It was partly motivated from the Amazing Atheist recent video called Atheism in 60 Seconds, which it was interesting, but it was also, I think, so brief. And it's part of blog culture and, tweet culture where everything gets down to this little tiny point. But I guess I wonder if some of the robust dialogue and the debate potential isn't being lost on YouTube. And I'm going to say one thing first, and then I want to give this sort of overarching framework. Okay, the first thing is I would love to see some people, and if you're watching this video, you know who you are. Find the person who you've been doing lots of dialogues with and ask yourself a couple of questions. Okay, if you've been in some debates and you've been in some really serious disagreements with people, and there are major YouTubers out there who I think you know who you are. You're in major debates and dialogues with people. Try, just for the sake of your audience, for the sake of the future of YouTube, for the integrity of yourself, for the community, try to say as clearly and as, I guess, as honestly as you can what you think the other person's position is. Don't lampoon them. Don't be snarky. Don't throw onto them the position that you know they probably don't have, or maybe have a resemblance to, but one that you have a quick and ready-made critique for. But try to imagine that the person is in the room and say their position as clearly as you think they could. I mean, actually try to defend it with no lampooning, no snarkiness. Try to actually state what you think their position is. And then once each of you try to state what the other person's position is. And honestly, like you're really trying to be that person, to really try to convincingly give the position better than they could. I mean, see if you can understand it to such a degree that you could make it better than they're making it. Okay, so you try to give that. And then, once you've done that, then you begin the critique. There's just not enough of that going on. But I thought I wanted to say just a couple of quick things here about what seem to be some wide, far-end disagreements, and then some of these narrow, close disagreements. Okay, I think the far-end disagreements are something like this. On the one end is what I'm going to call deterministic absolute flukeism. Deterministic absolute flukeism. So, on the one end, it's like everything is an absolute fluke. It was contingent, random, not only the cosmos itself coming into existence, but even despite the deterministic nature of the universe, it's a fluke that abiogenesis occurred, and there is an illusion of agency, there's an illusion of choice that's experienced by an organism that really is a contingent, random, hapless fluke just floating around, and all of this is basically meaningless. That's on the one end. On the other extreme end of that is something like there was an omnipotent, all-knowing, all-loving God who had a divine plan, and out of eternity created the cosmos, the world, created life as we know it, and gave people the sense of agency that is an actual agency, an actual sense of freedom, and that freedom is to be used in certain ways. And at least in the dominant Christian Western world, this relates to something like an ultimate plan, some ultimate meaning in the unfolding, and it includes a sentencing of a judgment and, I guess, some ultimate evaluation of one's deeds in this life in a hereafter, some sort of afterlife. Now, again, those are the absolute extreme positions. You can inch over on there. I mean, not only do you have, I guess, on the side of deterministic, there are many people who would say, well, we don't know if the cosmos was determined or not, but they're going to say, well, it seems that, and again, people, they're going to say we don't know if the Big Bang was one Big Bang, or if the Big Bang that we know as the Big Bang was the most recent of several. Some people may say that, well, okay, the cosmos was determined, but I'm sorry, the cosmos wasn't determined. It was a fluke, but because it is an orderliness and a regularity and a deterministic structure, the abiogenesis was necessary and determined. So life itself was determined, even though the cosmos was not determined. And then from there, they get to, again, agency is something like a fluke. It is a happen, or it has an appearance of agency really due to quantum fluctuations and sort of random occurrences that are going on at the quantum level. It's not really a free will worth wanting. If anything, it introduces random variations that get experienced by people as freedom, despite the fact that there is no freedom. Then over here, you have other kinds of people saying, well, no, we're not free in this superlative sense, and it's not a freedom that is related to some sort of divine plan that is all worked out or that has guaranteed some people, I guess, something like an opportunity for a life other than in this one. I mean, if you move even to something just a little bit over like Judaism, I mean, Judaism doesn't have any notion of the personal afterlife or salvation or judgment, heaven and hell, as it's known, in the bulk of Christianity. Okay, so, and then then as you move toward the middle there, you get to compatibilist positions. So you might have it over there on the atheistic side. Someone might say, well, there actually is a sense of agency and choice and freedom. Now, it's not free will in the divine plan religious sense, and it's not a register of some extra mundane fact. There's not some transcendent realm that's being registered, but there is, in fact, a kind of agency that occurs through information processing, of organismal goal seeking. Forms of communication technologies and complexity have enabled this organism to not just experience itself as free despite being deterministic, but depending upon the level of analysis, actually exercise a kind of agency and a chosen self-making and or collective relation making through navigating toward a future consciously. Now, as you move over from the other side, people might say, well, yeah, some of this is, it's not that it was a divine plan. It's not that it was some sort of by fiat God giving people freedom, but this was the cosmic life force itself, which necessarily emerged out. And the people here might say, well, no, the universe necessarily emerged not from a God, but by its own non-contingency, is a non-contingent ground of being. The question of is it contingent or non-contingent, those are some of those far extreme. But if a person who says, well, okay, no, I say no, it's actually non-contingent. It was a necessary ground of being, and life was necessary, and part of life was the necessity for certain kinds of complexity to emerge the capacity for self-legislation. And all of this was a yearning in life for more life, that as you move from different stages of vegetation to forms of animal life to forms of culture, and whether even culture is in different forms of primates and as well as humans, but there seems to be some kind of expansion from, I guess, organisms which reproduce and open in space and time in the way that plants do, in the way that animals do, and then ultimately the way that organisms which have cultures and bind time the way that we do, right? Those seem to be merging then toward, and you get to something toward the middle there where you have, I guess, what's called agnostic atheist and then agnostic theist. But it seems like, unless people are willing to entertain the idea that not everyone who is on the other side of the fence holds a ridiculous extreme position, and maybe people are sharing more or sharing less, or they're, see, some of this, I guess, God, this is so hard to talk about. I mean, part of it is a problem of literalism. So I'm thinking more about, I don't even know how to get at all this, but I'm thinking more about McGilchrist's book, and it's as if both of these are really, I mean, is far extreme as these two are, you got the far end deterministic absolute flukeism, and then you have divine plan monotheistic afterlife sort of stuff. And as far as extreme as those are, they're both actually almost identical from the perspective of the left hemisphere. I mean, from the left hemisphere, they're both a belief that thought is going to do the trick, that you're going to be able to think yourself into a coherent understanding of all of this. See, again, I use the word this. I mean, it's sort of like speech and thought and even feelings. They imagine that they can reduce the world down and deal with the world on their own terms. So just as an example, if I say, is there something beyond speech? Well, I say, well, what is it? Let's hear it. And then we start to get in this game, well, you can't say what's beyond language. Well, then I end up saying, well, there isn't anything beyond language. Well, not that you could say. And then you do the same thing with thought. Is there something beyond thought? Well, thought wants to go, not that I can think of. And it seems to think that whatever it thinks will sufficiently be the way of handling whatever is there. Emotions, the emotions seem to give a register about a fact of the matter, about the world, or about our relationship to the world, but they change with our awareness of them. They change as we talk about them. They change even in a particular culture. That is, they become compound emotions where I may feel a certain way and then feel bad or good about myself because in my culture I felt that way. I mean, it gets to be very complicated the way that emotions and thought and feeling get bound up with one another. But I think they seem to imagine that they can deal with the world on their own terms, or that they can spell out things in a way that it will make sense, or it will be coherent. It will all converge into aha, this is what it is, or this isn't what it is. And so much of the world it's beyond what one could think, what can say, even what one could feel. It's you can't, you're like, you have to in silence open to the world itself. And when I say the world itself, that's just more words. It gets to be so problematic. I mean, you have to sort of like squeegee your eyes and go out in the world and listen to what's around you and touch what's around you, to eat a piece of fruit and to actually taste it and to experience it, and the entire larger world, to open to it in its ambiguity, in its indefiniteness, and I guess to ask what is that without rushing forward with a word or a thought or a feeling that somehow tries to disambiguate it with an answer. I don't know why it's so difficult maybe for thought to accept that there's so much beyond it, that thoughts representations of the world, its mapping of the world, its whole sensibility it's just thought's take on it. If the world were nothing but a thought, then thought's view on it would be okay. But the world is so much more than thought. And the world is so much more than language. And now we're caught in our own language because we're using the word world. See, I mean, it gets to be so like a hall of mirrors. And I think if people could, if people could really try to openly, honestly talk with one another as best they can, to really try to say what another's position is, and to not do it in a snarky way, but to see to what extent they can, and then maybe be humbled by their inability to non-tongue-in-cheek actually say what the other person's position is. I would love to see it. I think anybody, if you would want to see two people who you've seen do a lot of dialogues, post them in the comment. Do a shout out to the people who should see this video and who you would like to see them phrase as clearly as they can what their opponent's view is. There's lots of people all through YouTube who are sort of standard in standard arguments. It would be really useful. But then at the end of the day, to realize that as important as that is, to get very clear on what the other person's position is, and to honestly try to say it as best you can without defensiveness, without trying to make fun of it, but to actually say it and better than they can, to the point where they go, wow, I wish I would have said it that way. And then you begin your critique, and then at a meta level, step back and ask yourself, is there an over trust or an over reliance upon the articulate, the explicit, the rationality of what could be verbalized and thought out? And isn't there something more, something that is intuitive, it's felt, but it's a kind of feeling that can't be explicitly stated or thought about? There seems to be a problem, I guess, in trying to too reductively talk about other people's position or even one's own position when thought, I guess, imagines that it's always going to be able to just do the trick on its own. Okay, thanks.